I have sat on this bench for nearly 4 decades, and in that time, I have developed a highly refined radar for deceit. Most people who come in here and lie do so poorly. They stammer, they fidget, and their eyes dart around the room as they try desperately to keep their fabricated stories straight. But every so often I encounter a specific breed of litigant, the smug scammer. The kind of person who walks into a court of law absolutely convinced that their charm, a tailored suit, and a fabricated narrative will easily outsmart the bench. On a brisk Tuesday morning, a man named Richard Vance did exactly that, turning a standard contract dispute into a masterclass on how to orchestrate your own ruin in exactly 2 minutes. I am going to tell you exactly how. Before I do, I want you to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because we bring you stories like this one every single week. Stories from this bench about what happens when people mistake a courtroom for a stage where they can perform their grifts without consequence. And drop a comment before we go any further. Tell me, have you ever watched someone lie with absolute, smug confidence to a person in a position of authority, fully believing they had everyone fooled? Tell me what happened, because Richard Vance did not fool anyone, and the way his facade crumbled is one of the most instructive moments I have witnessed doing this work. Now, let us begin. The case before me was a small claims dispute over a residential contracting job. The plaintiff was a 8-year-old retired schoolteacher named Martha Higgins. She was suing the defendant, Richard Vance, for $8,500, the exact amount she had paid him upfront to renovate the only bathroom in her modest home. According to Mrs. Higgins' complaint, Vance had come in, demolished the bathroom entirely down to the studs, and then simply vanished. He left her to use a neighbor's facilities for 3 months while he completely ignored her calls and text messages. It is a despicable scenario, but unfortunately, not an uncommon one in small claims court. What made this particular case different was the unadulterated arrogance of the defendant. Richard Vance strolled into my courtroom wearing a pristine tailored suit, carrying an expensive leather briefcase, and wearing a smirk that suggested he found the entire proceeding completely beneath him. He did not look like a man defending his livelihood. He looked like a man deeply annoyed that his day had been interrupted. He exuded an entitlement that told me, before he even opened his mouth, that he believed he was the smartest person in the room and that his lies were about to easily win the day. I called the court to order and asked Mrs. Higgins to present her claim. She stood up, her hands trembling slightly, as she arranged a meticulously organized folder of documents on the podium before her. She was not a wealthy woman. The $8,500 she had handed over to Richard Vance was drawn from a fixed pension, saved month by month over 3 years for a renovation she desperately needed for accessibility reasons. She spoke softly, detailing how Vance had charmed her during the initial consultation, promising a quick, 2-week turnaround. She presented the signed contract, the cash check, and the photographs of her bathroom, a chaotic hazard zone of exposed pipes, torn drywall, and debris that had sat untouched for 90 days. It was a compelling, heartbreaking, and entirely straightforward presentation of facts. Through it all, I watched Richard Vance. When you sit on this bench long enough, you learn to read the silent language of the people standing before you. A person with a genuine defense listens intently, perhaps taking notes or waiting anxiously for their turn to clarify a misunderstanding. Vance did none of that. Instead, he leaned heavily against his podium, casually inspecting his fingernails. Every so often, he would let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling, as if Mrs. Higgins' testimony was the most tedious inconvenience he had ever been subjected to. This is the essence of privilege collapsing in real time, the absolute delusion that the rules of human decency, let alone the law, do not apply to you. He believed his expensive suit and his polished vocabulary would serve as an impenetrable shield against the tearful testimony of an elderly woman. When Mrs. Higgins concluded her statement, placing a stack of unanswered text messages into evidence, I turned my attention to the defendant. "Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "you have heard the plaintiff's claim and seen the photographic evidence of the demolition. Do you dispute that you took $8,500 from this woman and left her home in an uninhabitable state?" He adjusted his tie, flashed a smile that belonged on a billboard rather than in a courtroom, and delivered his first profound mistake of the morning. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "with all due respect to Mrs. Higgins, she simply doesn't understand the complexities of the modern supply chain." This is a massive overreaction to standard industry delays. He chuckled lightly, a sound that resonated unpleasantly in the quiet room. You see, when we tore down the walls, we discovered unforeseen structural issues, rotted joists, plumbing that wasn't up to code. I tried to explain to her that materials for that kind of specialized repair take time to source, but she just started panicking. I'm a professional, Your Honor. I can't be expected to babysit a client who doesn't understand the realities of construction. I let him finish. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, watching the smug satisfaction settle on his features. He truly believed he had just delivered a masterful, airtight defense. He thought he had successfully painted Mrs. Higgins as an ignorant, hysterical old woman and himself as the patient, misunderstood professional. Mr. Vance, I said, my tone deliberately measured, that is a fascinating explanation. However, Mrs. Higgins has submitted 3 months' worth of text messages. In those messages, she repeatedly asks for updates. She asks when you will return to secure the exposed plumbing. She asks for receipts for the materials you claim you were sourcing with her $8,500. I picked up the stack of printed messages and held them up. I have read every single page, Mr. Vance. Would you like to know what I did not find? His smirk faltered slightly, a microscopic crack in his polished armor. What's that, Your Honor? A single response from you, I said, dropping the papers back onto my desk. Not one explanation about structural issues, not one update on specialized materials. In fact, for 92 days, you did not reply to a single communication from this woman whose only bathroom you demolished. Does the modern supply chain also disrupt cellular service, Mr. Vance? The gallery, usually a murmur of hushed conversations and shuffling papers, was dead silent. Mrs. Higgins stood remarkably still, her hands clasped tightly together. Vance shifted his weight, his eyes darting toward the gallery for a split second before returning to me. Well, Your Honor, as I said, I'm a busy contractor. I don't always have time to text clients back immediately when I'm out in the field managing multiple projects, but I assure you, the work was going to be completed. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. A busy contractor, I repeated, letting the words echo in the quiet courtroom. Out in the field, managing multiple complex projects, that is a perfectly reasonable defense for a slight communication delay. However, it is an exceptionally poor defense when it is entirely contradicted by your own very public, very detailed digital footprint. I opened the second folder Mrs. Higgins had submitted into evidence. This is the precise moment in a trial where the illusion of untouchability begins to completely shatter. I held up a color photograph printed directly from his social media account. Mr. Vance, this is a picture of you on a chartered yacht in Cabo San Lucas. It was posted on August 14th, exactly 3 weeks after you demolished the plaintiff's bathroom and deposited her $8,500 check. The caption you wrote reads, "Living the dream, zero stress." The gallery let out a collective murmur. Vance's posture suddenly stiffened, and he finally stopped inspecting his fingernails. Your Honor, I am a professional. I am allowed to take a personal vacation. That has absolutely nothing to do with this contract or her plumbing. I agree, I said smoothly. A single vacation is not a crime, but let us review the rest of your alleged fieldwork. I flipped to the next page. September 2nd, pictured at a high-stakes poker table in Las Vegas. September 18th, purchasing a purebred French bulldog. October 5th, test driving a luxury sports car. Every single one of these photographs is time-stamped during the exact 92-day window you claim to be overwhelmed with structural emergencies, while Mrs. Higgins was forced to walk to her neighbor's house just to use a restroom. This is the stage of a legal proceeding known as the evidence collapse. It is the exact instant when a person who relies entirely on their arrogant performance is suddenly suffocated by undeniable facts. The smug, condescending smile on his face began to curdle into genuine panic. He was realizing, in real time, that his expensive suit and smooth talking were entirely useless here. Those are just pictures, he stammered, his polished vocabulary suddenly abandoning him. Social media isn't real life. It's just marketing, Your Honor. You can't use that to say I wasn't working on her house. I am not using it to say you weren't working, I clarified, my voice dropping to a firm register that commanded the room. I am using it to prove that you looked me in the eye and lied to this court just 60 seconds ago when you claimed you were too busy to return a text message. You had plenty of time to update your followers, Mr. Vance. You simply decided that this woman, who funded your lavish lifestyle, was no longer worth your attention. Vance's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable shade of red. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then finally managed, "Your Honor, the scope of work changed. When we opened the walls, the framing was completely rotted. The plumbing was ancient. I couldn't just throw up drywall over a disaster. I was trying to protect her investment. Is that right?" I asked, leaning forward. "Did you take photographs of this extensive rot?" My crew did. "Yes," he stammered. "And did you submit those photographs to this court as evidence of the delay?" Not today, Your Honor." "Did you text or email those photographs to Mrs. Higgins to explain why her bathroom would be out of commission for 3 months?" He swallowed hard. "I prefer to explain complex structural issues in person. It's better customer service." "And yet," I replied, "in 92 days, you never once visited her in person to explain these complexities. You only managed to visit Cabo, Las Vegas, and a luxury car dealership. I picked up the original contract that Mrs. Higgins had submitted." "Let us talk about your customer service, Mr. Vance. This contract is for $8,500. It explicitly states that the project will be completed within 14 business days of the demolition. It also includes a clause written by you, stating that any unforeseen structural issues requiring additional time or funds must be communicated in writing and approved by the homeowner before proceeding. Did you follow your own contract?" "I was going to, Your Honor," he insisted, his voice growing thin. "I just got backed up. The supply chain." "Stop talking about the supply chain," I interrupted sharply. "The supply chain did not force you to ignore an elderly woman's frantic text messages for 3 months while you spent her money on a vacation. The supply chain did not force you to walk into this courtroom today and attempt to lie your way out of a legally binding agreement. This is the turning point in cases involving blatant arrogance. It is the moment the defendant realizes that the judge is not merely listening to the words being spoken, but systematically dismantling the entire psychological framework of their grift. Vance had spent his entire career talking his way out of corners, bullying clients into submission, and relying on his polished exterior to mask his unethical practices. Now, stripped of his usual tactics, he had nothing left to offer. "Your Honor," he tried one last time, his tone now pleading rather than condescending. "I fully intend to finish the job. If you just give me another week, I'll have my best crew out there." "Mr. Vance," I said, "the only thing you are going to finish today is writing a check." I looked down at the paperwork in front of me, aligning the edges of the contract and the printed photographs with deliberate precision. "I am finding in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Higgins, for the full return of her initial deposit, $8,500. Vance let out a sharp, exasperated breath, shaking his head. "Fine, fine. I'll write the check, and we can all move on from this." He reached into his expensive designer briefcase, pulling out a leather-bound checkbook, moving with the brisk annoyance of a wealthy man paying a minor parking ticket. He believed that his money was the ultimate shield that he could simply buy his way out of the public humiliation he was currently experiencing. He thought his status would protect him, but it didn't. "Put your checkbook away, Mr. Vance," I said sharply. "I am not finished." His hand froze midair. He looked up, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What do you mean? You just said $8,500. I said I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff for the underlying contract." I corrected him, keeping my gaze locked entirely on his face. "However, this court possesses the legal authority to award additional punitive damages when a party's conduct during litigation constitutes bad faith. You walked into this courtroom today with the explicit, documented intention to deceive me. You presented a defense that you knew was entirely fabricated. You claimed you were too busy managing complex structural issues to answer a text message, while simultaneously posting photographs of yourself gambling in Las Vegas and lounging on a yacht. The remaining color drained entirely from Richard Vance's face. This is exactly what happens when privilege meets reality. This is the courtroom where privilege collapsed. He had spent his entire life thinking his charm and his confidence made him untouchable. He was wrong. You attempted to use the legal system not to resolve a genuine dispute, but to exhaust, intimidate, and mock a 8-year-old retired schoolteacher, I continued, my voice echoing in the absolute silence of the room. Because your own testimony has provided a clear, undeniable admission of bad faith, I am awarding Mrs. Higgins an additional $5,000 in punitive damages, plus the full cost of her legal filing and processing fees. Your total judgment today is not $8,500. It is $13,650. You can't be serious, he stammered, gripping the edges of his podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. Over a bathroom delay? You're going to penalize me $5,000 extra because I took a vacation? I am penalizing you because power was never meant to be a shield for fraud, I told him coldly. I am penalizing you because you stood in a court of law and treated it like a stage for your arrogance. Justice does not care about your tailored suit, Mr. Vance, just as it does not care who your father is or how much money you have in the bank. Today, your character is what remains when your power fails. He looked at me, completely stunned. The calculation on his face was almost visible as he processed the fact that he was now writing a check for an amount significantly larger than the original job, not because of a contractual error, but because of his own ego. He had walked into my courtroom completely untouchable, and exactly 2 minutes later, he was leaving $13,650 poorer. He slowly unclipped a gold pen from his pocket, his hand visibly shaking now, and began to fill out the check. I'll need a moment to transfer some funds, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. The booming, confident contractor, who had arrived just minutes prior, was completely gone. Take all the time you need, Mr. Vance, I replied, watching him sign his name. The clerk will wait. I watched him hand the check to the bailiff, who then passed it to Mrs. Higgins. She took it with both hands, tears welling in her eyes, not just from the relief of getting her money back, but from the profound validation of being heard and believed after months of being dismissed. Mrs. Higgins, I addressed her directly, my tone softening. You are dismissed. I hope you are able to find a reputable professional to complete your bathroom. Thank you, Your Honor, she whispered, carefully tucking the check into her purse. Thank you so much. As she walked out of the courtroom, head held high, Richard Vance stood frozen at his podium. He looked down at his expensive briefcase, then up at me, clearly unsure of how to exit a room he had entered like a conquering hero. You are excused, Mr. Vance, I told him, and let me offer you one piece of free advice before you go. The next time you decide to take a vacation on a client's dime, I highly recommend you stay off social media. He did not look back. Richard Vance gathered his pristine leather briefcase, which suddenly seemed far too heavy for him, and walked down the center aisle toward the heavy wooden doors. The confident, untouchable stride he had entered with was entirely gone, replaced by the hurried, hunched shuffle of a man who had just collided with reality at full speed. The gallery watched him go in absolute silence. No one felt sorry for him. They had just witnessed a man try to weaponize his privilege against a vulnerable woman, only to have the system turn that very weapon against him in spectacular fashion. Small claims court is not just about the money. Yes, Mrs. Higgins walked out with $13,650 to repair her home and restore her dignity, but she also walked out with something far more profound, the undeniable proof that the law still protects the vulnerable from the entitled. Here is what I want you to remember from the morning of Richard Vance. People who rely on manipulation and condescension always believe they are the smartest people in the room. They believe their tailored suits, their rehearsed smiles, and their expensive jargon will serve as an impenetrable fortress against accountability. They operate on the assumption that nobody will ever have the courage or the actual authority to hold their feet to the fire. But a courtroom is not a stage, and justice is not an audience. When you walk into a room of consequence and choose to perform contempt, you are handing the law every single piece of evidence it needs to strip you of your power. Richard Vance thought his status made him untouchable. He learned, in the span of a few minutes, that power was never meant to be a shield for bad faith. If you believe that arrogance should never go unpunished and that the truth always finds a way to reveal itself in the end, hit the like button right now. Subscribe to this channel, because we bring you stories exactly like this one every single week. Stories where the truth outsmarts the lie. And leave a comment below. Have you ever seen someone try to talk their way out of a lie, only to have their own public actions used against them? Did they finally pay the price? Let me know in the comments. Never forget that the things you do when you think no one is watching, or in Richard Vance's case, in the bright lights of Cabo San Lucas, will eventually be measured against the words you speak under oath. Treat every room you enter with the respect it deserves. Choose your actions wisely. Character is what remains when power fails.